Howdy everyone. I'm currently working on these angle pieces here. These are F796 Bravo. Both you have to make a left and a right. And you have to make these shim pieces as well. And that entire package is depicted here on drawing number 38, detail F. You've got the bracket here, you've got the couple of spacers, and that all has to mix in with the fuel tank attachment bracket, which is here. You've got some bolts, you've got a screw that comes in from the outside into the bracket. These holes you have to pay very close attention to, and you have to pay close attention to how they're oriented with the longerons, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the first thing that I've done is I made the brackets as drawn for the most part, and I've made the spacers. Now, here's one of the brackets, and what I've noticed is that it is a lot shorter than what's shown on the prints. This drawing on the print is full scale, and this bracket, you can see, if I just lay it on here real quick, is about 1/4 of an inch shorter than what's drawn. But this is what I need to fit where it needs to fit. So let me grab a couple parts here. So if we come over to the airplane, I've got this side done. I'm working on this side here, which is the left side. So this is where the bracket needs to go, and this particular bracket sits right in here, like that. So you could see if it was any longer, it just wouldn't fit. So I use the plans as a guide, but I make the part to the actual airplane. So now that this has been made, and I knocked my spacer on the floor, the next thing that I do is I work on the spacer. Now I'm going to crawl up underneath here. So again, I've made the spacer initially to how it's drawn on the plans. In this spacer, there are two thicknesses, a 0.32 thickness and a 0.63 thickness. This is the 32 thousandths spacer here. This one, when you look at the plans, the thin one goes on first, and then the thick spacer goes over top of it. So if you make these to the plans, you'll notice that this piece here, there's a big radius right here. When you make this piece to the plans, when you go to cleco it in place, it will not lay flat. It will ride up on this radius like that, and you'll have a gap here behind it. So what I ended up doing was, again, these are just spacers. I just went ahead and cut this edge down a little bit so that it will lay flat in here like that. Since these are spacers, I'm not getting too wound up about edge distance. I mean, if you wanted, you could probably just put washers in here. So again, not getting hung up on edge distance with the spacers. So I cut this one down, and the one on the other side that I've already completed, I cut it down a little bit so that it won't ride up on this radius here. It will lay nice and flat. So now that I have that done, I've drawn a center line down the other side of it. And now what I'll do is I'll cleco this using the top hole. I'll cleco it in place like this, and then from the other side, I'll line that line through these holes, and I'll go ahead and match drill this to these from the outside. And then I'll take the other spacer, the thicker spacer, since it lays on top of this spacer, it clears this radius. So that thicker one doesn't need to be cut down. So once I line this up and I get it match drilled with these holes, then I'll take this, I'll use this as a guide to drill the other spacer. And then I'll have both the spacers match drilled to these. So let me do that and then I'll come back. All right, so I'm going to try to do some more explanations or give you some explanations on this bracket here that fits inside here. All right. So like I said, I've made the spacers. I've got them both here, and I made these just like I said. I trimmed them down to fit in here. After I had the one fit and match drilled to the skin, I used it as a template to drill the other one. So now I've got both spacers finished. Now I'm moving on to this bracket here. And again, originally I had made this to the prints, but they were a little too big. They wouldn't fit in here properly, so I had to machine it down to fit, and which made it smaller than what the plans show. So at that point I decided to abandon putting in the holes. The plans will tell you exactly where to put the holes and what size. A couple of them, they do tell you to hold off and match drill them to the rest of the structure. I decided to just fit the entire assembly to the structure before I drilled the holes. So that's kind of where I am now. I'm getting ready to do that here in a minute. Before I do that though, I wanted to point out, like they show on the plans, there are some angles that have to be cut on here. This end here has to be cut at an angle to fit the angle of the this aluminum angle here. Since this is at an angle, this has to be cut at an angle, and then you relieve the corners at 45 degrees. And then you have to round the bottom part here. You have to round that on both ends, so this will nest inside the radius of this angle and this angle. These are radius on the inside, and these pieces will not fit flat if you don't have these rounded to nest with the radius of the angles. Once you have that done and you have your piece fitted in here, it's just a matter of, at this point, everything is already dictated. So once you have it up against this piece and you have it nested between this top angle and this angle, that's where it's going to go. There's nowhere else to put it. And you have holes pre-punched on your skin on the outside. So at this point, it's nothing more than holding this piece in place and coming through and locating these holes through the skin onto your part. So that's what I'm getting ready to do now. But I'm going to do it one at a time, starting at the top. I'm going to start at this edge here and work my way down and match drill these holes one at a time, because they're different sizes, and I want to make sure that the hole in the skin, the holes that are punched in this piece, the holes that I just put on the spacers, and then the holes that are ultimately going to be transferred onto this piece. I want to make sure all those pieces line up really nice. I don't want to have, say, the skin in relation to these angle pieces. I don't want them to shift. And I just blatantly go through and start match drilling, because that's going to make, since these holes have shifted, they're going to be elongated. So I want to make sure that I get everything pulled back into alignment and do these holes a little at a time. But like I said, once you have your piece made, there's nowhere for it to go. Once you have it in here, you have it held tight against here. It's already sandwiched between the two longerons, so you just hold it in here in place and start locating your holes. So that's what I'm going to do next. When I get that finished, I'll come back. Here I have my bracket in work, in place. Behind it, at the moment, I do not have any of the spacers. But what I did was I held the bracket in place. Like I said, it's trapped between these two longerons, and I have it pushed up against this piece so that it's flush. Of course, it's not now because it's just swinging on a cleco. But I held it in place up against here, trapped between these two angles. And then I came from the outside through here with the drill bit to make a mark. And then I took the angle over to the drill press, drilled it, brought it back, and now it's held in place with this top cleco here. But I noticed, like I had mentioned before, when I look through these holes, here, the holes in the skin and the holes in this piece here, they didn't line up correctly with each other, just between the skin and this other piece. So if I would have gone ahead and just blindly match drilled through there, either the hole in the skin or the hole in this other back piece here would have been elongated. So this cleco is holding the top of this angle piece in place. These two clecos, which you can see, are not in all the way. These two are just pulling the skin and the flange of this part in here. These two clecos are just pulling those pieces together so that the hole will line up. So now this hole is nicely lined up. So with these two clecos partially in place, that hole is now lined up nicely, and I'm going to go ahead, make sure that my angle piece is held in the right spot, and I'm just going to make a little mark here. Once I do that, then I can bring the assembly back and cleco through this hole and again through this hole. That will hold everything together, including lining up these other two holes, and I should be able to go ahead and drill through, or at least make my marks. So let me do that, and I'll be back. Here is the bracket installed. Now, like I've said, I've got it finished. This bracket is finished as far as the angles that are cut, the radiuses on the back of each end so that it will nest in the radius of this angle and in this angle. All of that is completed. It's pushed back up against this piece, nice and tight in here. And I now have it match drilled to the skin, which you can see here. So I've match drilled it through this longeron, the skin, and through this top. Actually, this is the bottom longeron because the fuselage is upside down. Now, if you study the plans, this angle piece that I just put on has to match this fuel tank support bracket. And if you look at the plans carefully, keep in mind that your fuselage at this point should be upside down. This angle piece, let me see if I can do this. This hole here matches this hole here that goes through this longeron. So this auxiliary longeron, this hole is the one that you use for this bracket. And now I'm getting a low battery indicator, so I'm going to keep this short. So let me reconfigure this and I'll show you what I'm getting at. Here is what I was trying to talk about a minute ago before my battery started to die. When you look at the prints, this bracket shares this hole here. This is the hole that intersects this longeron, this auxiliary longeron here, and the bulkhead here. So that bracket shares this hole, which again is on this longeron here. Now the fuselage is upside down, so don't get confused with this longeron. That is the mating hole between this auxiliary longeron, which is at an angle. This is the bottom longeron. This piece that you're working on currently, and the bracket itself, the fuel tank attached bracket. So I went ahead and drilled that hole location to a number 12, and now I've got the bracket itself clecoed in place. You'll notice that I have a line drawn through the center of these holes that go up through here. With the bracket clecoed and the line drawn, now it's just a matter of centering the other hole of the bracket along that line, marking it, moving the bracket out of the way, and drilling through. So I'm going to do that next. Now, like I said, I like to do things in steps, so I'll probably take this angle bracket out. I'll position this where I need it to be positioned. Then I'll drill through the skin and this bulkhead. At that point, I'll bring my bracket back and cleco it in place. And then I'll go through the holes that I just drilled and mark the bracket. And then I'll take the bracket out over to the drill press and drill it. At that point, I'll have to come back and put my spacers in, because this hole here goes through the spacers as well. Since I've initially made the spacers, I have not had them back in place. After I get this hole drilled through everything, then I'm going to have to come back, put my spacers in here, and then drill the hole through those. But first, let me get this hole drilled through the skins and through my angle bracket. Alrighty, folks, let's see how this works. So, like I said, I had my bracket attached here at this hole location. Using the bracket and the line that I have drawn through these holes, I marked this top hole here, and then I took the bracket out and I elected to go very slowly, a few steps at a time, bigger and bigger, till I got to the number 12 drill bit size, and I just went ahead and drilled right through the angle bracket and everything. So this is the hole. You have to make sure that you have your spacers in place. They could be held in place with a couple of clecos, but make sure that your spacers are in place so you can match drill this hole through the entire package. So this hole goes through the skin, the two spacers, and your angle bracket that's back here. So at this point, everything's been drilled, everything's been clecoed. I'm now gonna test fit this bracket. So I gotta pull all this apart. Make sure I don't drop my spacers. Alright, I'm going to get some of these chips out of here. Just so everything will lay nice and flat. Alright. First thing I do is get my spacers oriented correctly. And I go ahead and I attach them temporarily. Alright, so those are being held by that cleco. Now I'm going to go ahead and attach the bracket. I'm going to attach the aluminum angle that we've been working on. Alright, so now this cleco is holding the spacers and the bracket. So I can take this one out, not out, but I can run it through the bracket itself now. Alright. So now I got the spacers and the angle bracket held in place. However, now that I think about it, I can't put the bracket on because the clecos are in the way. So, since this cleco is holding everything, I can take this one out. Make sure the bracket is oriented correctly per the plans. So that worked. Let's see. I believe those spacers are wedged in there tight enough. I can take this out. There you have it. Now, just to be sure, I can run a couple of clecos through this way, just to make sure that those spacers are being held, and they are. And that's that. And that is the process that I use to establish where that angle bracket needs to be in relation with this bracket and getting all the holes where they need to be. Rather than pre-drilling that angle as per the plans, I just fit it on the airplane where it needs to be and use the skin as a drill guide basically, and go through it a step at a time to get the spacers drilled, get the angle bracket drilled, and get this piece fitted to the entire assembly. Alright, so I know it's tedious and I know it's kind of haphazard, but when you get into it and you go through it, it will make a little bit more sense for you. And of course, if you have questions or if you need some clarification, you can always shoot me an email. Alright, so that's done now on both sides. I'm going to take a couple photographs. I'm going to move on to the next step, which I believe are the rudder pedals. Talk to you soon.